framework that we work with, in that if there is surplus government land, that it is put to the market for disposal. So I suppose that there is that little bit of conflict, perceived conflict, with what we do and the policy that exists.
So it's probably quite variable, I guess, depending on the politics of the day. But you mentioned that there's a framework you're working within there. Would you say you're more guided by that framework or the politics of the day when you're making those decisions?
It is the framework.
Yeah.
So the government land transaction guidelines dictate that we are selling government land.
Okay.
Or surplus government land, I should say.
Yeah.
So that's what we work within. But in terms of what I have to do, we probably go over, I would say we would go over and above what would be necessary to disclose as part of a typical government sale of land.
And why is that?
I think it's a perception issue. So
you want to make sure that the community
government needs to be seen to be doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think what is perceived to be the right thing by government probably needs to be greater than maybe within private industry.
Okay. And so that framework that you're working within, does that change with governments? Does that evolve in response to, if I'm hearing you right now, you're saying there's a framework, you work within that, sometimes you kind of have to do a bit more or tinker a bit here so that it meets public expectations. So is the framework evolving?
Does it vary between governments? I think it evolves. It's evolved, and there's an expectation that as our knowledge, particularly around the science of contamination, improves, that there is a greater expectation, and we're seeing an evolution in what's expected to be done.
Okay.
So I'd say 15 years ago, groundwater was a significant focus. It was becoming an increased focus.
Yep.
So we were then undertaking a greater level of assessment associated with groundwater. As we've moved forward, groundwater and soil contamination is an issue, but as part of that, we're now seeing other parts of land contamination issues evolve, such as soil vapour, that 15 years ago we weren't really taking into consideration. No.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that probably leads nicely, the framework element anyway, into the next question, which is around what concepts, tools and guidance you use to make public decisions. Mm-hmm. And for some people it's just a gut feel, there isn't anything they use,
yep.
But I'm curious to know what you use.
Yeah, so this is again another thing that's evolved, and I suppose it goes back to when my position here was created, that there was no framework. There was no position. So
yep.
This position has evolved and developed as I've grown with it. So we've had to. Initially, it came down to a gut feel.
Yep.
So what needs to be done, and then it's now got to a point where it's like, we actually need to come up with a basis for what we do and when we do it.
Yeah.
So, from a government land perspective, managing contamination, I've developed a contaminated land management site assessment tool.
Yeah.
Which is it's pretty much it's a policy document that my group now uses to determine the level of assessment that needs to be undertaken for each site.
Yeah.
And at what point we determine whether a site is suitable for sale or we need to go back and do some further work.
Yeah.
So it really...
Is that the tool you came up with about 4 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think, it's a document I did send on to you. So it's really just a risk assessment tool that we've used. So it puts a little bit of rigour and robustness, and it gives us rather than being a subjective decision, it comes down to a semi-quantifiable assessment of the risk that exists to the site.
You're sort of feeling like it's got a bit more objectivity to it.
Well, if someone asks, well, how do you decide you're going to remediate this one but decide not to remediate that one, we say, well, I went through the risk assessment tool, that came out as a level 25, that one was number 20, that was 20.
Yep.
And once it's over, it's determined to be a high risk, then we decide that that's where we do remediation.
Presumably, because you helped design the tool, or came up with the tool, you find it works pretty well. Have you found that, like, May has had any feedback on it? Like, she finds it... I guess I'm trying to understand what frameworks help people and what...
I don't think so. It's based on an EPA guidance document.
Yep.
So there's some foundations there that we're relying upon for development of that